This morning we lift up Imbolc, this pan-Celtic holiday central to, well, maybe not central, but important to many pagan communities, modern and ancient, and also to some expressions of Catholicism, as it lifts up this particular deity, this pan-Celtic figure, an ancient mother in her own right, Brigid, or Breed, or Bride, depending on where you're at, or even perhaps Brigantia, or Britannia, where we derive the word Britain from, the name, that part of the British Isles. So an important goddess for sure, but what exactly is Imbolc? And the fun answer is we don't actually know 100% because the people of the British Isles before Christianization and colonization were pre-literate. So we have to infer a lot. Nonetheless, this holiday does have significance for pagan communities today and for Catholic communities, so we'll get into it. I guess, first off, who is Brigid? Who is this goddess that's so important? And what does she have to do with Catholicism? Well, some of y'all might recognize as Saint Brigid of Kildare, the patron saint of Ireland. And we don't have an historical account of her life or birth in a hagiography, but she does share the same name and many of the same purviews as this ancient goddess Brigid. The earliest accounts we can find come from 10th century manuscripts written by Christian monks, again, pre-literate culture. And like most female deities in the Celtic mythologies, they don't get a lot of screen time or page time, if you will, but she is noted importantly as a goddess of poetry, a goddess of poets and a poet herself. And this is no small thing. To be a poet in pre-Christian Ireland was not to be a tea-sipping hipster. It was to have power, y'all, real power. When you don't write things down, the people who can make you immortal are the people who can remember the stories and can tell the stories or the jokes. And so one's immortality might be preserved in a song or a poem, and if they didn't like you, it could be in satire for a real long time after you're gone. So this is an important, we have some poets ourselves. Where's Daryl? Yeah, the power of poets was central to the cultural and political tradition of ancient Ireland. But she is also noted as the goddess who invented the practice of keening, when a method of grief, basically yelling a lot, getting it out of you, y'all, getting it out. That's an important faculty for people who lose their children. Being able to express grief is critical. And too often we keep it close and keep it held down. I think this is an injustice we do unto ourselves too often, but here is this goddess who, in the mythology where her son betrays his people and winds up losing his life in the process, she cries bitterly for him and invents the act of keening, which is a tradition practiced in Irish families for a long time, likely persisting to this day in some places. So these two qualities, poetry, yelling, there's more. There's more. In Cormac's glossary, which comes a little bit after the Christian manuscripts of the 10th century, which is like an attempt to catalog all these different components of Irish culture. It was important as they were getting a lot of, the history of Ireland being pressed on by England is old, and I don't got time for all that right now. But he notes Brigid in his work and says that, yeah, she is the goddess of poetry, but also ascribes two other qualities, which we can see reflected in the saint as well. A domain of healing and healing waters in particular, and of smithcraft and the forge, making matter into new shapes. Many healing wells, springs in Ireland bear folklore connected to Saint Brigid, possibly connected to Brigid, the goddess as well. We really can't be sure. It's kind of murky. The forge element is also a little murky, but her other roles as they relate to warrior class people in pre-Christian Irish culture may shed some light on why this is important. And I'm going to get into this in a little bit later as we talk about other aspects of Brigid, because she's very complicated. But it seems little wonder to me, and this is my personal experience with this deity in Unitarian Universalist circles, very, very popular as a patron with Unitarian Universalist pagans. I can think of at least two colleagues who have a devotional practice to Brigid, or as they call her, Bride, the Scottish context. A symbol of a perpetual burning flame, one that is still kept burning at the Abbey of Kildare by the nuns dedicated to St. Brigid's life and work. The symbol of the forge, the poets, the inspiration, the imagination, the mercy, and the advocacy for those who live outside the bonds of the village. For Brigid is not just a poet or a craftsperson or a healer, but is also an advocate for the people in the later Ulster cycles. We'll save that for the homily as a whole. And friends, as we move into altar building, I invite you to keep some of these elements alive inside of you, whether this is just an intellectual curiosity, if this is some possible path for a spiritual trajectory for you, whatever this figure could mean to you. Consider the way that she holds multiplicity: Catholic, pagan. These three domains, which may at first seem disconnected, but ultimately come back to the root of insight and imagination and care. What is sparking inside of you, friends? What is sparking inside of you? Where is healing needed in your life? Where is change happening? How is love reshaping you into a vessel for more love, more justice, more joy in this life? Spirit of life, spirit of all that is good and moving in the ground, the whispers of the spring to come, the warming of the days we so long for, the warming of hearts too long lost to cold manipulations of power, the cage, the bullet, or the bludgeon, the brokenness of this world that longs for healing, broken parts of us that long for restoration, sense of estrangement, named, unnamed. May it all be grounded in a deep knowing, felt in our bones, that we come into this world first worthy. Before we're anything else, we belong here. Before we have a name or language, before our eyes are open, that first breath, that note of love, someone, somewhere, may it be here too. A love beyond belief, a love who takes every name that's given it, so long as it's given in love. And may these brief reflections, the people here, bear witness to such a love. The Side with Love campaign, which is it's an institution within Unitarian Universalism that promotes social justice causes across the country and helps us to connect with ways we might connect with movements for the common good in our area. These past several weeks have been, 2 weeks I suppose, have been the 30 days of love, and we've shared some of their resources on Discord, but today I'd like to harken back to the first week and the letter that was given to us from the Side with Love campaign about decriminalization, and I'd like to share that with you now. So this year's theme is imagining an interdependent future. With each new year, we move into a new intentional holy time of spiritual nourishment, contemplation, and embodiment. A new year can carry with it the weight and grief of the former while inviting us into possibility and prophecy of the new. So we enter 2024 witnessing unconscionable suffering and injustice at a scale that calls us all to deeply reimagine a future where we all can thrive. The only way through this moment is together, bound by a commitment to our shared humanity and interdependence. 30 Days of Love offers a place to study and stretch as we faithfully journey towards wholeness and collective liberation. Together, let us imagine an interdependent future and order our work along this path. In this first week, we explored the theme of safety and how it shows up in our world and our decriminalization work. In Letters from a Birmingham Jail, Reverend Martin Luther King wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Reverend Martin Luther King's words and context offer us an important lesson. First, that we need each other to survive. Second, we learn that when you challenge an usurped power held by the state, criminalization is a routine tactic to repress a people rising up to be free. Today, we are experiencing a contest for power, accountable collective governance for all, or power organized and held by the few. This contest is not new. To me, it is clear that a new world is emerging. As the civil rights movement helped usher in a new day, we are witnessing the mass mobilization and subsequent violent repression that are hallmarks of political and social transformation. But as we are reminded in this letter, before criminalization becomes a political tactic of disconnection and domination, It is first a spiritual acquiescence to dehumanization and disposability. In other words, believing people are able to be thrown away casually. We deny a moral mandate of mutuality in search for the protection of power. We deny a moral mandate of mutuality in search of the protection of power over others, as our nation struggles to realize the promise of liberty and justice for all. It also reckons with the ways it has used oppression to construct an idea of safety that relies on the comforts of those in power. We have witnessed this in battles around integration, access to medical care for trans people, book bans, and more. This country has erased people from history, from legal recognition, and from the public square in order to secure power in a world demanding change. The struggle for collective liberation must not be mistaken for a threat to safety. I'll read that again. The struggle for collective liberation must not be mistaken for a threat to safety. Today, we know the consequences are too great. History teaches us what happens when we build a world around an exclusionary idea of safety. Our government carves borders, erects armies, surveils, polices, imprisons, and threatens, and with each action towards this end, we make enemies of one another. We devote our resources, our labors, our arts, our children to mutually assured destruction, so no one in this kind of world can really be safe. Decriminalization is a political and a spiritual project. This past year at General Assembly, the denomination voted to focus on the Stop Cop City campaign. So our work to Stop Cop City dismantles the false ideal of safety. This false ideal is destroying forests, intensifying violence against communities of color, silencing the electorate. As a people of faith, we cannot affirm the worth and dignity of all while privileging the well-being of a chosen few. We are not fully human when we separate ourselves from the humanity of others. Decriminalization is a process of healing and reconnection. A just and abundant concept of safety requires all of us. It proclaims a future where care and safety are abundant because our relationships are cultivated through mutuality, not domination. We act, showing up with and for communities to win campaigns and to grow a network of love, compassion, and care. This is the work of community building. This is how we keep us safe. But especially if you felt that this service kind of took a big turn. We're like, the harps are playing and we're in Ireland and Scotland, and then where are we at now? Whoa. Hold on with me, all. I promise it'll hopefully make a little bit more sense shortly. So we named 3 Brigits, right? We named the poet and the healer and the blacksmith. And these are the 3 most commonly ascribed qualities to this goddess, and also related to the Catholic saint as well. But there are 3 more from the Ulster cycles, obscure sources, but have taken on a life of their own, especially in modern expressions of paganism that venerate Brigid. And 2 of them are less important right now. The one I really want to share with you is Brigid Ambue, Brigid of the Cowless. Cowless. Who is Cowless? People without wealth. Ambue generally was reserved for people in a pre-Christian Irish context that did not have cows, did not have land, did not have wealth, usually living on the outside of a village, would also be reserved for people who were not from this area, people who were traveling or itinerant or foreigners. Ambue, people on the outside. Brigid Ambue was considered one of the justices, the lawgivers. These women, sometimes related as sisters, sometimes as a mother, a daughter, and a granddaughter, who are also still simultaneously deified, who were concerned with particular domains of helping certain groups of people. And Brigid Ambue was concerned with helping these people on the outside of their communities, advocating for them, for the cowless. Now, how do people wind up cowless? Well, one way is to be born that way, of course. People are born into poverty every day, all the time. It still happens. That lack of access to means, that lack of access to resources definitely characterizes a person's life. It can lead them to make some really hard choices, sometimes some really dangerous, destructive choices in order to make ends meet. We see this all the time, all over the world, an old problem to our present day. People might also not receive an inheritance, which was another way a person might, even from a higher social class in Ireland, fall to this lifestyle of being a reiver or one of the Fianna, these roving war tribes that would kind of function like highwaymen, mostly stealing cattle. This was a common practice way back when you wanted to get after somebody or to have something for yourself. Stealing cows was basically picking someone's pocket, except the pocket's a lot bigger and it's at a fence. Because there wasn't much in the way of currency, the cow was wealth. Cow was wealth, and to not have that wealth would be to have you be on the outside. Now, Imbolc has a couple of different potential origins. We do understand that it's the beginning of spring, or with spring beginning to begin, cows are beginning to produce milk. Soon we'll have dandelions in the fields. It's happening, it's turning, it's just slow, but it's beginning. One definition, one etymological source for Imbolc could be in the belly, referring to the time when livestock were giving birth. Another potential etymological root, which is more questionable, but is at least compelling, is buttering of the wolves, which is an interesting mental image. But butter and milk have been, in a number of religious traditions, used as a purifying agent, a ritual cleanser. We see this in some expressions of Hinduism. Saint Bridgit herself is said to have been baptized in milk. This may have been used to cleanse people who were coming back in from their time in the wilderness as Fianna, as reavers, as warriors, to welcome them back in and to reintegrate them into society, because people aren't disposable. Even if they've had to do some bad things or have done bad things for whatever particular reason, people are not disposable. People can be held to account for their actions. People can face consequences for their actions. People are not disposable. We find this in our first principle. We find this reflected in our Article 2, and these, of course, are not like hardcore creedal beliefs of ours, but they are things we at least and always ought to be aspiring towards. It can be challenging to find the inherent worth and dignity in somebody who has harmed us greatly. And yet our faith calls us to that. Unitarian Universalism is not, has not, cannot be a simple faith. Any more than this goddess character Brigid can be a simple entity, transcending traditions, embodying a pluralism within herself. So many faces, so many crafts, and here she is passing laws, making communities whole again. And no doubt this is challenging. I can't imagine what it would be like to be one of the people whose cattle got stolen, and then here these people come back in, they're being washed in milk. What do you think about that? That's hard, for sure. And yet, a higher love calls us to a deeper justice, calls us to set aside what has been hurt by us and to be genuinely concerned about the material circumstances of our neighbor. And make no mistake, material circumstances play a big role in determining whether somebody who is cowless, in our times even, for certainly people go without, and from that withoutness, do some heinous things. Think about how gang activity happens. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say gang activity is related to one phenomenon, just not having resources. It's complicated. Just like the work and the spiritual and political practice of decriminalization is complicated. There's no one thing we can do. There's no one right way. It will take time, and more importantly, it will take involvement, hands, hearts, minds, at the table, on the street, in the voting booth, doing the work of setting other people free, because that's what we're about here. That is what love is in action. It breaks bonds, it opens hearts, it restores community, it restores our faith for one another. And when we treat people like they're disposable, I mean, what are we doing but betraying one of the core threads of the human condition, that we do, in fact, need one another? We may not always see or know why we need one another right away, but trust that we do. We all bring something to this world, something to this life. Maybe we just haven't had the opportunity to realize it yet. And yet, the current way our criminal justice system functions is just flat out punitive. It would put people in jail for inhaling a certain plant. That would take people's resources for, especially people who are poor. Fines are generally much harder on people with lower economic means than people with more. I remember when I got some fines before I had any kind of stable employment, and it was kind of a life or death thing. It was hard. Like $75 can be a lot to come up with. It might not be a lot today or for some people, but trust it is a lot for others. These material circumstances lead to all kinds of things. Maybe I don't get insurance, but I need a car to get my job, but now I'm breaking the law. This is challenging. I do have car insurance these days, y'all. But there was a time when I didn't, because I had to make that decision. This is like the most meager iteration of this, right? We're talking about heavier and harder things, but this is part of it. This is certainly part of the bigger spectrum. When you don't have resources, you have to make hard decisions. Sometimes those decisions are like, are other people disposable? Often that decision is informed by, have I been treated like I'm disposable? The more often that latter question is true, the more often people will lean towards the former, to reach into someone else's pocket, to break something and take what they need. Like my colleague said, for those who are dumpster diving, taking drugs, crossing borders, seeking gender-affirming care, whatever it is you're doing, safety, love, celebration. And potentially, if harm is caused, we might need to consider accountability. But ultimately, the way our current systems of criminal justice function is to brand people as breakers of an oath, cast them out, find them into oblivion, to harm. Now, sometimes these might be useful tools, but they cannot be the only way. And if we lean on these as the only way, if we stay in our gilded false sense of safety for the sake of the criminal justice system and the prison industrial complex, will we harm ourselves as much as we harm one another? For is it not said that so long as one amongst us is in chains, none of us are free? Particularly as Rosa Parks, that was unaware, Pam, thank you for lifting that up. A Rosa Parks, talk about a person who got uncomfortable for the sake of sparking a fire for liberation, y'all. Rosa Parks was trained at the Highlander Center, a place I used to work in Tennessee. Wild place that had been burned down by the Ku Klux Klan twice. It still stands. Was actually burned down by neo-fascists recently. Sometimes when you're doing the right thing, you attract the wrong kind of attention. But nonetheless, they are persistent. They've stayed scrapping all this time, and Rosa Parks is part of their legacy. To get trained, because one needs training to be able to endure the jeers and the sneers and the hateful acts you'll encounter when you go breaking the rules for the cause of liberation. And yeah, Rosa Parks was put in jail, as many people who protested for their liberation and the liberations of their neighbors were put in jail back then. This has happened before. It will happen again. And now I don't mean to sit here and just condone criminal behavior, pretend that this is easy. It's not easy. It's never going to be easy. There's too many people on this planet for it to ever be easy. But it is necessary. And if we don't get it right the first try, we have to keep trying. We might not ever find a system that works entirely once and for all well for everyone, but as it stands right now, the people who suffer the most from the criminal justice system are already the people most cast to the margins of our society. People who are Ambue in their own terms, folks who have come from next to nothing or nothing at all, and from those material circumstances have had to make some decisions. Now, may we be a people that are open to the complexity of this question, open to being curious about why we might feel safe or unsafe with the idea of prisons and jails. It's okay if this challenges you. It's not easy. It's okay if you're also like, yeah, or maybe more radical than me, because it's complicated and we need all of this. We need all of us and all that we are together at the table, deconstructing this massive problem and not pretending like it's a thing we can sit on for an eternity while people are ground up in a system that treats them like a number and not a person, doesn't equip them with the skills to reintegrate into society, to be with people again. And when they get home, is there a food store? Is there a bank? Is there a school with good education? Is there transportation? Is the water clean? Are there bombs in the air? Because if any of those are true, and many more criteria I couldn't possibly begin to think to name right now, then we have not achieved a reform. We have just put people back into an untenable circumstance, and recidivism becomes really, really hard. We need to hold the human dignity of the people on the outside as close to heart as we hold our own, friends, and it's challenging. But we are called to this challenge, and we are capable of meeting it, not alone, not isolated or as individuals, but together, because that's what this is about. It's about reconnection with the margins, drawing the circle of who the human family is wider and wider still. And to do this, friends, I invite you to consider these qualities that we mentioned of Bride, right? Poetry, healing, the forge, the Ambue, the advocacy for the outside. May in your heart there be a spark of inspiration, something new, a new idea, and may you harness your fire to share it. May you harness your fire to share it and shape it into something new, to be shared with your community. And may that be a source of healing, cool for the parts of you, the parts of us, the parts of this world that ache for the new, that ache for the healing, that are looking for that water that has to be there somewhere. May it be this, friends, and may your fire stay burning and alive today and tomorrow and all the days of your life, illuminating the path towards a beloved community, that place where all can be welcome at love's table, that we go towards together.